Then, without warning, at the end of March 1941, Rommel's tanks swept eastward. Rommel had broken up his small force into columns, and he hurled them in so many directions against the British defensive line that it was hard to fathom his intentions. These mechanized columns moved with incredible speed, advancing at night with lights dimmed. Time and again they caught their enemy by surprise, suddenly appearing to their flank or rear. As their line was breached in multiple places, the British were compelled to retreat farther and farther east. To Wavell, who was following these events from Cairo, this was downright shocking and humiliating. Rommel was causing chaos with a disproportionately small number of tanks and severe supply limitations. Within a few weeks, the Germans had advanced to the border of Egypt. What was most devastating about this offensive was the novel way in which Rommel fought. He used the desert as if it were an ocean. Despite supply problems and the difficult terrain, he kept his tanks in perpetual motion. The British could not let up their guard for a moment, and this mentally exhausted them. But his movements, though seemingly random, were always for a purpose. If he wanted to take a particular city, he would head in the opposite direction, then circle and attack from an unexpected side. He brought along an armada of trucks to kick up enough dust so that the British could not see where he was headed, and to give the impression of a much larger force than was actually on the attack. Rommel would ride with the front line, risking death so that he could make rapid judgments on the move, sending his columns here and there before the British had time to figure out the game. And he used his tanks in the opposite way of the British, to deadly effect. Instead of pushing them forward to punch holes in the enemy lines, he would send out his weakest tanks, then have them retreat at first contact. The British tanks would invariably swallow the bait and go in pursuit, kicking up so much of their own dust in the process that they would not see they were running straight into a line of German anti-tank guns. Once a sufficient number of British tanks had been taken out, Rommel would advance again, wreaking havoc behind the British lines. Kept constantly on their heels, forced to come to rapid decisions in response to Rommel's moves, the British made endless mistakes. Not knowing where he might show up next, or from what direction, they spread their forces over dangerously vast areas. Before long, at the mere mention that a German column was approaching, Rommel at its head, the British would abandon their positions even though they greatly outnumbered him. In the end, the only thing that stopped him was Hitler's obsession with Russia, which bled Rommel of the supplies and reinforcements he needed to conquer Egypt. Interpretation. The key to Rommel's success was to seize the initiative with one bold maneuver, then exploit this momentary advantage to the fullest. Everything in this world conspires to put you on the defensive. At work, your superiors may want the glory for themselves and will discourage you from taking the initiative. People are constantly pushing and attacking, keeping you in react mode. You are continually reminded of your limitations and what you cannot hope to accomplish. You are made to feel guilty for this and that. Such defensiveness on your part can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Before anything, you need to liberate yourself from this feeling. By acting boldly, by moving to seize the initiative, you create circumstances rather than waiting for what life brings you. Your initial push alters the situation on your terms. People are made to react to you, making you seem larger and more powerful than may be the case. The respect and fear you inspire will translate into offensive power, a reputation that precedes you. Like Rommel, you must have a touch of madness, ready to disorient and confuse for its own sake, to keep advancing no matter the circumstance. It is up to you. Be constantly defensive, or make others feel it instead. Reversal. This strategy has no reversal. Any effort to seem not to control a situation, To refuse to influence a relationship is, in fact, a form of control. By ceding power to others, you have gained a kind of passive authority that you can use later for your own purposes. There is no escape from the control dynamic. Those who say they are doing so are playing the most insidious control game of all. 16. Hit them where it hurts. The center of gravity strategy. Everyone has a source of power on which he or she depends. When you look at your rivals, search below the surface for that source, the center of gravity that holds the entire structure together. That center can be their wealth, their popularity, a key position, a winning strategy. Hitting them there will inflict disproportionate pain. Find what the other side most cherishes and protects. That is where you must strike. Pillars of Collapse. In 210 BC, a young Roman general named Publius Scipio the Younger, later called Scipio Africanus, was sent to northeastern Spain with a simple mission: to hold the Ebro River against the powerful Carthaginian armies that were threatening to cross it and take control of the peninsula. This was Scipio's first assignment as commander, and as he looked out on the river and plotted his strategy, he felt a strange mix of emotions. 8 years earlier, the great Carthaginian commander Hannibal had crossed this river heading north. Onward he had gone into Gaul, and then, catching the Romans by surprise, had crossed the Alps into Italy. Scipio, only 18 at the time, had fought alongside his father, a general, in the first battles against Hannibal on Italian soil. He had seen the North African's battlefield skills with his own eyes. Hannibal had maneuvered his small army brilliantly, made maximum use of his superior cavalry, and through inexhaustible creativity had constantly managed to surprise the Romans and inflict on them a series of humiliating defeats, culminating in the virtual annihilation of the Roman legions in the Battle of Cannae in 216 BC. Scipio also recalled 2 events after Cannae that had had an overwhelming effect on him. First, a Roman general named Fabius had finally conceived a strategy to keep Hannibal at bay. Keeping his legions in the hills and avoiding direct battle, Fabius had launched hit-and-run raids designed to wear down the Carthaginians, who were fighting far from their home in what is now Tunisia. The campaign had worked as a holding action, but to Scipio it had seemed equally exhausting for the Romans to fight so long and still have the enemy at their doorstep. Also, since the plan could not lead to any real defeat of Hannibal, it was basically flawed. Second, a year into Hannibal's invasion, the Romans had sent Scipio's father to Spain to try to knock out the Carthaginian bases there. For 6 years, Scipio's father had fought the Carthaginians on the Spanish peninsula, but the campaign had ended in his defeat and death in 211 BC. As Scipio studied the reports coming in about the situation beyond the Ebro, a plan took root in his mind. With one bold maneuver, he could avenge his father's death the year before, demonstrate the effectiveness of a strategy he thought far better than Fabius, and set in motion the eventual collapse, not just of Hannibal, but of Carthage itself. Along the coast to the south of him was the city of New Carthage, present-day Cartagena, the Carthaginians' capital in Spain. There they stored their vast wealth, their army's supplies, and the hostages they had taken from different Spanish tribes to be held as ransom in case of rebellion. At this moment, the Carthaginian armies, which outnumbered the Romans 2-1, were scattered about the country, trying to gain further domination over the Spanish tribes, and were all several days' march from New Carthage. Their commanders, Scipio learned, had been quarreling among themselves over power and money. Meanwhile, New Carthage was garrisoned with only 1,000 men. Disobeying his orders to take his stand at the Ebro, Scipio advanced south by ship and led a daring raid on New Carthage. This walled city was considered impregnable, but he timed his attack for the ebbing of the tide in a lagoon on the city's north side. There his men were able to scale the walls relatively easily, and New Carthage was taken. In one move, Scipio had produced a dramatic turnaround. Now the Romans commanded the central position in Spain. They had the money and supplies on which the Carthaginians in Spain depended, and they had Carthage's hostages, whom they now could use to stir revolt among the conquered tribes. Over the next few years, Scipio exploited this position and slowly brought Spain under Roman control. In 205 BC, Scipio returned to Rome a hero, but Hannibal was still a menace in Italy's interior. Scipio now wanted to take the war to Africa by marching on Carthage itself. That was the only way to get Hannibal out of Italy and finally erase Carthage as a threat. But Fabius was still the commander in charge of Rome's strategy, and few saw the point of fighting Hannibal by waging wars so far from him and from Rome. Yet Scipio's prestige was high, and the Roman Senate finally gave him an army, a small, low-quality army, to use for his campaign. Wasting no time on arguing his case, Scipio proceeded to make an alliance with Massinissa, king of the Massiles, Carthage's neighbors. Massinissa would supply him with a large and well-trained cavalry. Then, in the spring of 204 BC, Scipio sailed for Africa and landed near Utica, not far from Carthage. Initially surprised, the Carthaginians rallied and were able to pin Scipio's troops on a peninsula outside the town. The situation looked bleak. If Scipio could somehow advance past the enemy troops that blocked his path, he would enter the heart of the enemy state and gain control of the situation. But that seemed an impossible task. He could not hope to fight his way past the tight Carthaginian cordon. Trapped where he was, his supplies would eventually run out, forcing him to surrender. Scipio bargained for peace, but used the negotiations as a way to spy on the Carthaginian army. Scipio's ambassadors told him that the enemy had two camps, one for its own army and the other for its main ally, the Numidians. Over the next few weeks, Scipio seemed indecisive, first breaking off negotiations, then reopening them, confusing the Carthaginians. Then, one night, he made a sneak attack on the Numidian camp and set it on fire. The blaze spread quickly, and the African soldiers panicked, scattering in every direction. Awakened by the hubbub, the Carthaginians opened the gates to their own camp to come to their allies' rescue. But in the confusion, the Romans were able to steal in and set fire to their camp as well. The enemy lost half their army in this battle by night, the rest managing to retreat to Numidia and Carthage. Suddenly, the Carthaginian interior lay open to Scipio's army. He proceeded to take town after town, advancing much as Hannibal had in Italy. Then he landed a contingent of troops at the port of Tunis, within sight of Carthage's walls. Now it was the Carthaginians' turn to panic, and Hannibal, their greatest general, was immediately recalled. In 202 BC, after 16 years of fighting on Rome's doorstep, Hannibal was finally compelled to leave Italy. Hannibal landed his army to Carthage's south and made plans to fight Scipio. But the Roman general retreated west to the Bagradas Valley, the most fertile farmlands of Carthage, its economic base. There he went on a rampage, destroying everything in sight. Hannibal had wanted to fight near Carthage, where he had shelter and material reinforcements. Instead, he was compelled to pursue Scipio before Carthage lost its richest territory. But Scipio kept retreating, refusing battle, until he had lured Hannibal to the town of Zama, where he secured a solid position and forced Hannibal to camp in a place without water. Now the two armies finally met in battle. Exhausted by their pursuit of Scipio, their cavalry neutralized by Massinissa, the Carthaginians were defeated, and with no refuge close enough to retreat to, Hannibal was forced to surrender. Carthage quickly sued for peace, and under the harsh terms imposed by Scipio and the Senate, it was reduced to a client state of Rome. As a Mediterranean power and a threat to Rome, Carthage was finished for good. Interpretation. The Romans were dazzled by Hannibal's strategic genius. They came to so fear him that the only strategies they could use against him were delay and avoidance. Scipio Africanus simply saw differently. At every turn he looked not at the enemy army, nor even at its leader, but at the pillar of support on which it stood, its critical vulnerability. When you look at your rivals, do not be distracted by their punch. To engage in any exchange of punches, in life or in war, is the height of stupidity and waste. Power depends on balance and support, so look at what is holding your enemy up, and remember that what holds him up can also make him fall. A person, like an army, usually gets his or her power from 3 or 4 simultaneous sources: money, popularity, skillful maneuvering, some particular advantage he has fostered. Knock out one, and he will have to depend more on the others. Knock out those, and he is lost. Weaken a boxer's legs, and he will reel and stagger, and when he does, be merciless. No power can stand without its legs. Keys to warfare. The most visible thing about power is its outward manifestation, what its witnesses see and feel. An army has its size, its weaponry, its shows of discipline, its aggressive maneuvers. Individuals have many ways of showing their position and influence. It is the nature of power to present a forceful front, to seem menacing and intimidating, strong and decisive. But this outward display is often exaggerated or even downright deceptive, since power does not dare show its weaknesses. And beneath the display is the support on which power rests, its center of gravity. The phrase is von Clausewitz's, who elaborated it as the hub of all power and movement on which everything depends. This is the part that governs the whole, a kind of nerve center. To attack the center of gravity, to neutralize or destroy it, is the ultimate strategy in war, for without it, the whole structure will collapse. The enemy may have great generals and strong armies, like Hannibal and his invincible army in Italy, but without a center of gravity, those armies cannot move and have no force or coherence. The enemy's center of gravity is where an injury will hurt him most, his point of greatest vulnerability. Hitting him there is the best way to end a conflict definitively and economically. Your enemy's center of gravity can be something abstract, like a quality, concept, or aptitude on which he depends, his reputation, his capacity to deceive, his unpredictability. But such strengths become critical vulnerabilities if you can make them unattractive or unusable. To find an enemy's center of gravity, you have to erase your own tendency to think in conventional terms, or to assume that the other side's center is the same as your own. In any interaction with people, you must train yourself to focus on their strength, the source of their power, whatever it is that gives them their most crucial support. That knowledge will afford you many strategic options, many angles from which to attack, subtly or not so subtly undermining their strength rather than hitting it head on. You can create no greater sense of panic in your enemies than that of being unable to use their strengths. Reversal. Every living creature has a center of gravity. Even the most decentralized group has to communicate and depends on a network that is vulnerable to attack. There is no reversal to this principle.